I did too, and I found them on Amazon.
I was about to say, where do I find them?
Amazon. You seem like the kind of grandma that might be something you would do.
Yeah, I was looking at that.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming, and welcome to our final Forsyth Friday Forum for the fall semester. This is our final forum for the fall semester. And today we will be having Geoff Iverson speaking on mapping the future, geography in the digital age. And also please help yourself to lots and lots of cookies in this direction. Mapping. So thanks, Geoff.
This is the interactive part of it.
Thank you, Sherry. So, my name's Geoff Iverson. I'm the newly minted social sciences librarian here at Forsyth, Fort Hays University. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about maps and GIS and the role that they play both in the academic library and in society at large. So, you may hypothetically ask me, but Geoff, hasn't everything been discovered already?
Geoff, hasn't everything been discovered already?
Of course not, Celia. And here's just one example of that. That's a rather obvious example of everything not being discovered. This is the Mars Curiosity rover, an image taken from November 23rd, 2014, about 1.5 weeks ago, mapping areas of the surface of Mars up close. So, planning to discover within the solar system, but not just in the solar system, but on the rest of Earth itself. Because we don't exist in a state of stasis, things are always changing one way or another. And perhaps it's not that we're discovering things in the kind of classic discovering new continents sense. That age of discovery is past, but more in the sense that mapping remains a tool to help us make sense of the world around us. And one way where maps are often used to help us make sense of the world is when we see them in the news. You see, for example, I have a map of the spread of Ebola in West Africa, also a map of the current situation in Iraq. And so anything that's happening in the news is going to have some sort of geographic element or an element of a where, and it eases our understanding of these kinds of events to have some sort of representation of that. And the map is one of the easiest ways to do that. I find myself going through the map in the newspaper article first often because, well, I love maps, obviously, but it's also just a way to make sense of things. For instance, we may not remember how Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia relate to each other off the top of our heads. Also, the situation in Iraq is currently quite confusing with the so-called Islamic State, Kurdish forces, and the government all occupying territory that's changing quite rapidly at this moment. This shows, I think, mid-November. But anyway, it's more helpful to us for me to show you this map than to say that, well, the government controls about the southern third of the country, and ISIS has a lot of the middle and western bits, and the Kurds control the north. You know, that's not as good of a picture for you. Of course, it doesn't have to be all grim subjects that we cover with maps. It can also be used for fun. And this particular example is from a recent New York Times article, and I'm going to actually go to the link because this is an interactive map. And what they were attempting to do here was to map NCAA sports fandom, Division I football in particular. It's kind of interesting. You can actually zoom in and view the data on the zip code level, which is what I'm doing right now. Now 67601, sorry?
We're not seeing it.
Oh, I see.
Uh-oh.
What I probably have to do is...
There we go, to your browser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm still having a little bit of trouble with bringing up Firefox here.
Professionals do that, then I don't feel bad.
Technology is mine.
Because it's on my
Wonderful. You're wired, right? Not
It's
wired.
on your screen, right?
Probably dragging.
Aha.
Yeah,
There you go.
Thank you.
You're on a dual monitor system.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So let's see. So bear with me here if you don't mind. Just trying to find us.
To the lateral.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, and so the reason why I wanted to actually hover over our zip code here was to show you the statistics, which are interesting. It says that the Jayhawks are 30% fans, the Wildcats are 14, and the Sooners are 11. But I wouldn't celebrate too much yet, Deb, because
I doubt the validity of their statistics, having lived here for a while.
well, what I was going to say was, so this is an interactive map, and the data in this map was taken from Facebook likes. So anybody care to point out potential drawbacks?
There's some people that just like everything.
Well, KU graduates are unemployed and about the time to work in Facebook.
Oh, there you go.
Or sooner ones can't read.
What's that zip code in Mississippi we want
I don't have zip codes there.
They may not have Facebook.
So anyway, this has a sort of volunteer bias of who decides to like something on Facebook. There's a number of people who may be football fans and choose not to like their team on Facebook. And you know, judging from the short time that I've lived here, I would have thought that it was more even between Wildcats and Jayhawks fans in Hayes, and that maybe there'd be more Huskers fans than Sooners fans in the town. But you know, you can. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. There's also
We don't allow.
other mistakes in this map.
Oh, I meant
Unsightly
Nebraska.
green spot in the middle of the
I
state of
meant Nebraska.
Michigan, but we won't talk about that.
Oh, look at that, Iowa State up there.
How's their coach?
I think he should be on the way out, but I don't know.
So anyway, back to the PowerPoint. So in that sense, bringing up the issue of where the data comes from, maps are like our books or our articles. It's important for us to consider where the data is coming from when we look at them. Were the maps put together by professionals, or were they just people with an interest? And you know, there is something to be said for that previous map. A lot of people are on Facebook, so it does work to get at least kind of a feeling for what would be the popular team in an area, but it only maybe works up to a certain extent. It's not exactly a peer review process. This here that I have up is an example of one of the topographic maps from the U.S. Geological Survey. And these maps have long been considered some of the best and most detailed maps of the United States. We actually have print versions of many of the topo maps up in the Government Documents Department. These are put out, the USGS is part of the U.S. Department of the Interior. And this map shows most of Ellis County in 1896. This was the oldest topo map that I was able to download for free online. But not only do we have the older ones, we actually have some pretty cool stuff with the newest topographic maps from 2012 that I want to show you, and I might have to drag that over again. So next time I do this, I'm going to have some kind of like transition music. So anyway, so the newest topographic survey maps, they actually come out with different layers that you can turn on and off. And you can actually see the satellite images, which I think is pretty cool. And unfortunately, the city of Hayes is bisected by one of the lines, so you have to look at Hayes North and Hayes South to see everything. But you can basically make kind of your own map out of this by choosing what you want to see. For example, maybe I want to get rid of the grid lines because they're kind of distracting. You can turn hydrography on and off.
I have a dumb question. What's hydrography?
Hydrography is essentially the word for all of the water elements So that would,
Ponds and
yeah, it would be
Creeks.
creeks and
Dry.
rivers here in Hayes. But yeah, and so the ability to turn layers on and off in a map is actually a key component of GIS, though this is not GIS. I might qualify it as kind of a GIS light, which I will be getting into a little bit later.
Are these like range and township maps?
So these
Sectioned
are,
off like that?
well, this is the 7.5 minute series, which is, so essentially you have latitude and longitude, and they're divided into hours, minutes, and seconds. And this is basically the smallest quadrilateral of the U.S. Geological Survey. So they have them of this size for basically the entire lower 48 at least. So I just wanted to share that. Anyhow, in short, maps exist everywhere, and the increasing ubiquity of digital technology has really helped to increase this. You see maps not only in GPS you may have in your car, but you carry them around with you in smartphones and tablets. I'm just trying to think 10 years ago, how many of us would have thought that we could say to our phone, show me the nearest Chinese restaurant, and it could spit that out for us cheerfully. So this ubiquity of maps brings me to the main thing that I was talking about, which is GIS. So, and this is probably going to be mostly review for Grady, but hopefully this is new to some people. So what is GIS? A definition for GIS that I like is a computer-based system to aid in the collection, maintenance, storage, analysis, output, and distribution of spatial data and information. Why would I like a definition like that? It's so wordy. Well, GIS is a complicated system in and of itself, and I think that you might necessarily need a wordy kind of definition in order to sort of be able to grasp everything that it can do. Even the initials GIS stand for a couple of different things. I most often call it Geographic Information Systems. The Geographic Information Systems or services usually refers to the software itself that one uses to look at basically geography, or it could also be geographic information science, because there's a whole study around how people use GIS. And so that's what they're referring to when that's the acronym. And it's important also to note that GIS is not the same as GPS or global positioning systems, which is what many of us might have in our car or smartphone or tablets. That's more of a satellite-based navigation system. However, GPS can be imported into GIS. So if you have a bunch of data in your GPS, it's possible to, repeating myself here, but it's possible to import that and analyze it. And so I'm going to actually show you a very simple use of GIS. And that's how we can change symbology and just kind of look at different properties of a geographic area. I'm going to zoom to the layer, and it's kind of, I'm being rather daring here trying to use ArcMap Live during a presentation, because it's something that takes a lot of memory and has been known to crash, so we'll try it. But what I'm going to do is take a look at symbology. So the layer that we're looking at up here is all of the is basically Kansas divided into zip codes. And it comes with, this I took from Tiger, which is files that I downloaded from the United States Census Bureau. And these files actually come with data embedded in them. And so what I want to look at is by zip code, how many homes, what percentage of homes are owner occupied. So I'm just going to quantities, and I'm going to take a look at owner occupied homes, have the field of normalization be the number of total housing units. And we also get to pick our colors, which is fun. I wouldn't recommend this one because it's going to give us some colors that look very similar. I'm going to go with kind of green to red. No. I want to go with like Actually hoping for more of a red to green if I could do it. If I could find it here under pressure. And so that automatically plugs that data in to every single zip code in Kansas, and we see the ones that are red have a very low percentage of homes that are owned, and the ones that are green have a very high percentage. And this might confirm some things. There's some things that I actually looked, I was wondering about. I was wondering, for example, I thought, I'm new to Kansas, I thought maybe that was Atchison or something like that. I was thinking, why are there so many, not people who don't own their homes in Atchison, but that was actually Leavenworth.
Yeah.
So
It's Fort Riley. Yeah.
that explains that. Yep, and Fort Riley was the other one you mentioned. And then you'll notice the darker green, we have suburbs of Wichita. We have a lot of Johnson County. Looks like areas around Topeka as well.
So you kind of get a suburban donut?
That's what we're looking at here. And so that's, just one kind of easy use of GIS, a way to make your data, to get the most you can out of it. And so this was, I mentioned that I got this from the US Census. You look at the attribute table of your data to see what kind of stuff is there. So this is mostly demographic information, and it pulled my table over here, so sorry guys. That gives you mostly demographic information about age, race, ethnicity.
Is that percentage?
It's raw numbers. What I did here was I showed it by quantity, and so it automatically calculated the percentage because I had the normalization be by number of housing units, period, and I had the other field to be the number of owner occupied. So it just divided that, and that's how I got percentage. But yeah, this is all raw numbers here.
But on your map, when you see a color, is that representing a percentage?
Yes.
Okay, so the map colors are big.
So what is that red clear up by the Nebraska border?
I'm not sure what that one is.
It's a missile silo.
Oh, all right then.
And it's owned. No, it's not owned.
Zip code 66970. I'm not sure what that is. If anybody wants to take a quick look.
Very curious about that.
6690.
66970.
That's stuff I can report you there, 669.
You invited a
postmaster.
Well done.
Good job.
So why is it?
Lovewell Reservoir.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not an actual town, I know that.
It's
Okay,
what
they gave a
reservoir?
reservoir its own zip code.
Lovewell.
Why'd they do that, Tom?
I guess there probably used to be a town.
They flooded it.
Weber.
Yeah,
Okay,
Every lake here, they flooded something, so.
yeah.
very
I
interesting.
knew it wasn't.
It probably was a town and got swallowed up.
So I showed you a little bit about some of the stuff we can do with GIS and how it can be very clunky to try to work in front of people. But what I like about GIS is that it's a multi-layered process in the literal sense that you're working with several mapping layers and seeing how these different geographic layers interact with each other. And it's also multi-layered in the sense that you can layer many disciplines and see how the disciplines intersect with each other within the realm of geography. And I personally think that this has a lot of exciting implications for research. And I think that the GIS is a great tool for finding these areas where the disciplines intersect. And it's from these intersections and by using this tool that we can make new discoveries. And one particular example that I have a map up here was in my previous job at the University of Michigan, I helped a graduate student whose life's work was essentially researching occupational surnames in County Gloucestershire, England. And what she was interested in doing was taking these, she had personally taken all of these notes that she'd written out by hand and put them in an Excel spreadsheet. And I helped her to clean this up and to attach the geographic portion of the Excel spreadsheet to a shapefile showing town locations in England. And what we were able to do was to confirm that the landscape and the available natural resources around an area corresponded with these surnames. And so, as an example, in the stony soil of the Cotswolds, you were more likely to have people with last names like Stoneman or Hoyer. And in the Forest of Dean, you were more likely to have people with last names like Hewer or Woodyer. And this was taken from medieval research. But this was one that we worked on for a long time, and I thought it was just a really interesting piece of research. Shows a way that we could use this tool that people think about as being mainly scientific for humanities research. In this case, it was intersection of linguistics, history, and land use. What GIS can also show us is where systems intersect, and we have the ability to gather together multiple layers, see how they interact with one another. And so all of this data, this is a map that I made earlier in the week, and this is data that I got from the Kansas Data Access and Support Center. And I was curious to see about oil and gas wells in Kansas, because that was one layer, and when I initially brought that layer in, there were over 400,000, and so the map was literally covered. I could hardly do anything with it. But there was also a shapefile, which is one of the types of GIS files, showing protected areas in the state of Kansas. So I thought I'd like to compare and see, were there any active oil and gas wells that were also located in areas that are protected by the state? And there were. There's currently 822 of them. Now, one of the first examples of using GIS-like systems analysis actually predates GIS by over 100 years, and I thought that this was pretty cool. I had to share it. It was through mapping that English physician John Snow was able to prove that cholera was a waterborne disease rather than an airborne disease, as was believed at the time. And this was done by, it's essentially what we'd call a dot density map today. He mapped deaths from cholera in the London outbreak in 1854. And that's basically all those black bars that you see. And he also brought a street grid and the locations of different pumps where people got their drinking water from. And he was able to conduct a network analysis and show that most of the deaths from cholera were either the shortest walking distance or shortest distance by following the streets from the pump on Broad Street. And upon further investigation, it was discovered that this particular Broad Street drinking water pump was located only 3 feet from a cesspit, and that was how cholera had gotten into the drinking water supply. And so in this way, he was able to kind of predate GIS by just using these various layers to make a discovery for the public good. And actually that still remains one of the uses of GIS is as a public health application. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of GIS in the library and what role I think that the academic library should have with GIS. Because in the geosciences department, they're already teaching some classes with GIS. Our job, I think, should be to find and to collect the best data for our users. And this is actually a bit of a challenge because all of the data is in widely varying formats, and there are some standardized formats, and especially geodatabases and shapefiles. There are also other kinds of formats that can display in various GIS programs, and so standardization is an issue. Also finding basically material that passes the CRAP test, CRAP with 2 A's, showing that it's current, relevant, authoritative, accurate, and what's its purpose. That's a test that we librarians have.
You didn't know that, did you, Dr.
Really? Didn't know
Acronyms are us.
And so some of that, as I just mentioned, is to find and locate the best information possible. And some of that is to find the best applications for users. So somebody might come to the library and say, I'd like to use GIS to draw a map showing me how to get from Hayes to Denver the quickest way. And that's sort of an issue where why use a sledgehammer when a rock hammer would work? You could just show them Google Maps or something. Make sure that basically the application that they need fits what they're doing is another one of our jobs. And finally, I think it's partially our responsibility to give the data meaning by providing context. And so, for example, I just showed you a map, and I showed you all that there were 800 oil and gas wells active on protected areas. I didn't provide any context for that, and I didn't have time to research it, so I don't have it.
We got some of the wetlands down where the
So were
science
the
center is.
areas protected before the oil wells? Or were the,
That's the kind of question that we should be asking ourselves when we look at these kinds of things. So just because we happen to have the raw data, people can often try to use data in any number of ways. And so we should be combining research that's been done with GIS with other resources that we have, including, you know, articles in our academic journals or what other research exists. It's not, you can use GIS as a tool to find things, but often there's got to be some kind of write-up with it. It's not going to be standing alone in a vacuum. Another thing I'd like for us to do, if we can, is to showcase work of students and faculty who make discoveries in GIS. And what I have here is an example of something that I and some other people at University of Michigan Clark Library worked on. There was a faculty member there in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment who wrote a paper called The Geography of Colorants. And this was basically talking about where and how in nature natural tints and pigments occurred that people use for natural dyes. And she actually had a GIS shapefile with her paper. And so we were doing an exhibit of particularly colorful maps. We decided that we wanted a GIS component. And we just did a kind of simple thing where we extracted those files, one for each color, to a KMZ format. We put them in Google Earth, and then we recorded Google Earth, basically spinning the planet around once. Here's all the places where there's orange colors. We move on to yellow, and so on. And we put that up on one of the TV screens, and that was a way to have a pretty interesting way to showcase some of the research that had been done, and entertaining too. It's also our responsibility to make sure that the resources are discoverable. So I mentioned earlier that we have to find and collect the best data for our users, but it's not worth much if we collect the data and nobody uses it. So one thing that I intend to do, and I'm going to say this in public, so hold me to it, is to create a GIS research guide where people can find some of that. And hopefully I can talk with people, with professors who are using GIS in their courses, encourage them to direct their students to that in order to get some of their data. It also works best when we as the library have communications with the academic departments so that we know what each other are doing, work together. In addition to making the resources discoverable, we need to keep track of how the data is being used and ensure that we're responding to patrons' needs properly. And at the University of Michigan, I'm going back to these because that's the only job I've had before this one. We would notice that there would be certain kinds of questions, GIS-based questions, that were getting asked more often than others. Like, for example, how do you create 3D contour lines? I want to do this for my architecture project. Or I'm interested in how Detroit has changed over time. How do I georeference, which is basically pin on top of, how do I georeference an aerial photograph from 1949 on top of today's satellite imagery? And so we actually created some tutorials for some of those sort of high demand questions so that, you know, when there's enough, we don't have to keep answering the same thing over and over again. We can show people something that we created that has less hemming and hawing, ums in it.
Geoff, you were hired before I was here. Tell me, although I got here before you, what was your work as a graduate? You were a graduate student, right?
Right.
When you were doing this, were you in a center or what were you?
Well, I worked for the Clark Library, which did maps, geospatial data, and government documents.
Okay.
And as part of that, I worked up in the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. We had this like little room where we were embedded one afternoon during the week, and so we help architecture students find GIS files for their work. Another way to help make GIS discoverable and maybe even a little bit less scary is to use what some people call GIS Lite, which is a sort of lesser subset of geospatial web applications. And it allows users who are maybe not quite so well versed in GIS to create maps. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole why use a sledgehammer when you could use a rock hammer, there's some times when you don't need as much. And so I'm going to open up OpenStreetMap, which is here. And the thing that's cool about OpenStreetMap is basically it's an open source mapping system online, and you can add anything to it as long as you sign in. And so yesterday I created a building footprint for the Forsyth Library that I added to it.
The only thing on the universe.
Well, and I was thinking maybe right now I could just show you how we would create another one. So let's see, this is Sheridan Hall, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple actually. So what we do is we just click on, we'd say that we want to draw an area, which is going to be a polygon, rather than a line or a point. And then what we do is we essentially draw around the building.
Trace it.
Yeah, pretty much trace it. Satellite image.
Cool.
Don't forget the fountain. No,
Fountain deserves its own little
Indeed.
I can square the corners to make it a little bit neater. Then save it again, and that will be uploaded to OpenStreetMap. It might not show up right now because it usually takes a little bit. Oh, and you know what I didn't do either was I didn't give it a name, so that's one thing you want to do.
So is OpenStreetMap then accumulating this data? Is this a crowdsourcing sort of thing?
It is, yeah,
Okay.
and it's interesting too because it's a worldwide website, and I'm just gonna name this Sheridan Hall real quick. And so when you go to other countries, you'll find that it's in the native language of that country and so on. But it's one that I just think is interesting, and I like that we have the ability to make these changes. Anybody happen to know how many floors are there?
3.
Thank you.
Nowadays.
Except 4 on a Forsyth Library standard.
I'm going to stick with 3 for now.
It's basically 1 here. There's maps.
Gotta save it.
Not on the elevator.
Yeah, on the elevator, thank God.
That's really cool.
But anyway, so now we have building footprints for 2 of our university buildings. I imagine that this one will probably show up tomorrow. And if anybody else wants to continue this work, feel free.
Sounds like a class project.
Yeah. Yeah, and luckily, in some of the larger cities, you'll find that actually they already do have building footprints for the entire city downloaded. It's kind of a funny thing that I ran into at the architecture school back in Michigan, where people, it was fine when people wanted building footprints of New York or Los Angeles. But then there's one time where people would say, "What do you mean you don't have building footprints for this small town in Mongolia?" They just, sometimes what you're looking for just doesn't exist. So that was OpenStreetMap. And finally, one of the directions that GIS has been going to is geodesign, which is using GIS to make decisions about where and how to build, and to help ensure that systems essentially align with and work better with, rather than in conflict with, the systems in nature. And the example that I have here shows one used at Yellowstone National Park, where park rangers needed to build an access road, but they wanted to make sure that they did it in a way that was minimally intrusive to the pronghorn antelope population. And so they actually combined several different layers. They took into account the density of small mammals, which includes pronghorn antelopes, and actually, no, it doesn't, but the density of pronghorn antelopes, density of plants, and elevation. And we're able to use this to determine the best possible locations to build an access road that would be minimally obtrusive to the natural systems. And this is actually one of the more complicated kinds of analyses that can be done with GIS. Usually when you do something like this, you are figuring out some kind of formula and providing a weight to each different aspect of it. And I think this gets into the area where you may want to talk with somebody in geosciences with a PhD to help figure out what exactly kind of weight should I be giving to each of these different aspects. But it's something that you can play with, and you can also use GIS to pretend without any harm. What happens if I slash right through this pronghorn antelope gathering place and build this road? What's the worst that could happen? Then you can kind of see what the impact is. And so this is a way that shows that GIS is a great tool, I think, and that maps in general, they teach us the past and help us understand the present. And now that we are getting to this amazing level of technology, they can also help us to plan for the future. So thanks for listening, and does anybody have any questions for me?
Fascinating, thank you.
You guys know all this, though.
All of it.
It's in the open maps.
What are you all working with students? What is their biggest need? What are they planning?
Rich is our
for?
GIS expert.
Expansion into new realms of data. The amount of geospatial data is just expanding at an amazing rate, and finding those new sources. Say, for instance, talking about, say, even at street level data. Now we've got databases where people are, things that no one ever thought they were going to map before. Even people's perceptions of neighborhoods are being entered into databases, and so tapping into that would be that'd be a wonderful thing. That, and also economic data is also another big thing that I'd like our students to get more of.
I would say helping students realize when they're students in disciplines outside of geosciences that this is a really handy thing to know about, at least, and be good at, ideally. Because you can win over a crowd of business people or of scientists in another discipline very quickly with a little bit of GIS razzle-dazzle. Or you cannot be duped by somebody else who's trying to do it if you understand what's being shown. And I've talked to a lot of people that have had jobs a year or two in other disciplines and said, wow, why didn't somebody tell me to take GIS when I was a student?
So you're saying people can con people and they can recognize when they're being conned?
Absolutely. Yeah, right. You would like to be the con-er, not the con-e.
Or hopefully, we're teaching people
Tomatoes, tomatoes.
Right. But yeah, no, because I mentioned geosciences a lot, but I would also, because that's an area where it seems that GIS already has like penetration of the topic a lot, and I'd also like to see it being used, if possible, in other disciplines. If there's the interest and if there's the will there.
Does that happen at Fort Hays? I'm just thinking about students writing theses. From outside of your discipline, do they use GIS? Is it widely used here on campus?
Biology is doing an excellent job of utilizing GIS right now. As a matter of fact, Dr. Channel he's the man who's running the GIS lab over that department. And I've seen some really excellent research come out of that department from their students using GIS.
Do you have any ag students? Because I could see applications for ag especially.
I know that Ag, of course, is using.
Will it touch
yeah.
base with you about?
But one thing interesting about agriculture, though, is they've kind of created their own little world of GIS. There's the software and hardware, so it's their world.
Yeah, and ideally, what we'd be doing here in the library is helping people to find sources that are free, as well as being good sources that we can trust. And there's actually quite a bit if you look at various government websites. Ellis County and the city of Hayes have some GIS on their website. And the one that I used to get all the Kansas data, which I wrote down somewhere here. Anyway, sorry, just looking for that. So I have to.
While you're looking, Geoff, I'm going to ask another question. So do we use ArcGIS or do we teach ArcGIS? Is that what
That's the primary software package that we use. We have some others, but that's the most widely used in the world today.
And ArcGIS is what I know. So I mean, I'd be happy to learn something else, of course. But, that seems to be the one that most people use. I mean, I would be interested in exploring open source because it's good to be able to have free stuff, have stuff where you don't have to worry about paying an exorbitant licensing fee. But the fact is that ArcGIS is the standard. It was the Kansas Data and Access Support Center where you can find a lot of good Kansas data. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I'd be hoping to gather for the library guide to pass along to students.
I know when I was at KU, I could sign up and I could take a GIS class just as a faculty or staff member. Do we do that here, or do we have enough resources to do that kind of
If
thing?
any faculty member wanted to take the class, audit the class, as long as there's space available, we'd be happy to listen.
We did just like introductory one day sort of workshops.
If you ever wanted to set up one of those workshops, please let me know.
Okay.
We've done things like that for different organizations.
That could be fun.
Please just let us know when.
Yeah, let's talk after. I took one and I produced nothing useful, but I'm always game to jump in and try again.
Yeah, I mean, I essentially took an intro. There's a grad level GIS course that I took it as a cognate while I was in library school, and that was tough. But it was from there that I was able to learn more on the job and essentially figure out. It's been mostly finding the best data and letting students do their work with it.
I actually had a GIS day at KU.
We have
It
it here.
was, do we have them here?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, it was
That's
just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
It's a what?
It's a wild party.
It's a wild party.
Any more questions?
Well, but to carry on what they're saying, maybe working with the MGC, they can promote that throughout northwest or western Kansas, or people come to the university for a day or for a class or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's
A lot of businesses would love that.
Sure, businesses, maybe some community colleges, there are all kinds of possibilities.
Partner with them to promote it.
GISD must be an annual thing. It must be is it
Yeah.
Yes,
always in November? And it's
Always in November,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a national thing. I stopped by at one of the events, but I think I was just stopping in the lab.
It's nice.
Well, if I had I guess the geosciences wish list I'd like to share is the United States has a tremendous amount of GIS data. And one of the limitations we have is when students want to do studies, global studies abroad, and meeting up with those barriers of not having data sets for Asia or Africa. If we maybe could talk about it after your presentation, the possibility of maybe trying to find those resources, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, there was actually, and one of my former colleagues at Michigan spoke Korean and Chinese, and she found some Korean and Chinese data sets all in those languages. So that was fine if you spoke one of those languages, and they were available for those who did. But didn't. I wasn't very helpful there, and a lot of us might not be.
Well, Geoff, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Before you leave, please partake of this one.
Oh,